Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Thanks for coming together for another episode of the ABAP Freak Show. We got a lot planned for today's episode, so we'll go ahead and jump right in. I'm joined by my colleague, DJ Adams. So we won't keep him too long, but we wanted to have him on to talk about the current SAP coding challenge before we jump into the main topic of the week, which we'll be doing some HANA development. So, DJ, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Tom. I was just saying to you before, it just feels very exciting and interesting to be on this side of the fence on a live stream. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about the second coding challenge?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tom. So basically, the SAP Community Coding Challenge, the blog post is there on the screen. I'm sure Thomas can share it in the chat as well. This is the second coding challenge that we've put out in the last few months. Tom put the first one out sort of back at the end of February, beginning of March. That was a great one, and that was based upon ABAP and some nice little tricky programming there. And so we put this coding challenge out, this number 2, a couple of weeks ago, sort of towards the end of April, and we decided that this time we'd take a little bit of a different flavor and go for a JavaScript-based challenge. Nothing strenuous, the whole idea is that it's a bit of fun, and we can all sort of collaborate and share each other's solutions at the end of the challenge and have a look at them and everything. And one of the reasons why I think that JavaScript is a great choice is that it's a first-class citizen language on SAP Cloud Platform and other platforms as well. And anybody who follows Jeff Atwood will know Atwood's law. Anything that can be written in JavaScript will eventually be written in JavaScript. So if you're a JavaScript professional, great. If you're a JavaScript beginner or not even touched JavaScript, this is a great opportunity just to dip your toe in the water. And specifically, the challenge that it has been set is for you to write something to explore this wonderful mathematical thing called the Collatz conjecture, which you can read all about. There's a link.
You do like your mathematical challenges, don't you?
I do. I'm not mathematically inclined myself. I was never. I did Latin, ancient Greek, and Sanskrit at university. So I'm very far away from maths, but I really like the simple stuff like this, and the Project Euler website is a great set of programming challenge problems that you can solve, and I've been using those. I use those to teach kids at various events here in Manchester, but also I've been doing that using Euler on the Code at Home series I've been doing as well, which is great. Deliberately avoiding talking about this one because, of course, I want you to all to sort of explore it and discover it yourself. It's a beautiful sequence. You can read all about it there, but basically the idea is to write a little program that will work out basically what's the longest sequence starting with terms under 1 million. The conjecture basically is, for those interested, that following these two simple rules, if n is even, then you divide n by 2. Or if the term is even, you divide it by 2. If the term is odd, you multiply by 3 and add 1. If you follow those simple rules, it's almost like Conway's Game of Life. Those simple rules can result in really beautiful, complex structures. Will that sequence of terms eventually end up always going to 1? That's the conjecture. It's not been proven yet. But this helps us explore it a little bit. So, it's just a bit of fun.
Okay, that sounds good. And how are things progressing with it?
Things are great. I mean, we've had some brilliant submissions, over 40 submissions so far, and I think there's more coming in today. Some folks have been submitting over the weekend, which is amazing. We've had submissions in Replit, in CodePen, in JS Fiddle. I've even had, and this sort of theoretically or technically should be disqualified because there's a solution in ABAP, which is it's like what? Of course. And we've had solutions in other systems as well. I won't say anything about that yet, but some wonderful solutions. Some sort of focusing on performance and optimization, which is lovely. We've had some with a little UI. We've even had one where the person has submitted the solution in the form of a UI5 application, which is beautiful. What's not to like? So we've had some brilliant solutions. Keep them coming. The end date for submission is basically the end of day on the 14th of May, which is this Thursday. So whatever the end of day, 23:59,
Yeah.
the end of your time zone, get those submissions in. The details again are in the blog post, and we'll see.
All right. Anything else you want to say about it before we wrap up on that topic, or?
I think that's pretty much it. What we're going to do once all the submissions are in, we'll have a review. We'll spend a few days next week having a review of those submissions, and we'll pick out some really nice ones, and we'll socialize those in different formats like we did before. I'm sure we're going to have a live stream, and we'll get some folks on to talk about that. And we'll see where we are. And as in Tom's original post, the number one prize is no prize. I never got the cultural reference that you made, but I'm sure maybe you can explain it.
Oh,
but
Marvel Comics.
No prize is really important. The what?
Marvel Comics. In the 70s, early 80s, Stan Lee, who was editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, if people would write in and find a continuity error, a punctuation error, or something like that, he famously gave them the no prize. And it started off just as a, thanks a lot for pointing out our mistake. And then they started printing these no prizes and mailing them to people. It was just a sheet of paper that said, congratulations, you've won the no prize.
Fabulous.
Bit of a joke, yeah.
Fabulous. Cool. No, I think that's pretty much it. You'll hear more from us sometime next week once all the submissions are in. And we'll take it from there.
That sounds excellent. Hope everybody's enjoying the challenges, and look forward to seeing the finalists and having a look at them. Yeah. All right. So DJ, I think you have other things to run to now.
I do. Thank you.
So we'll be letting you go. But thanks for joining us, and I look forward to having you back again on a future episode.
Thanks, Thomas.
Yep. Have a good day. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
All right. That was great of DJ to be able to join us. Let me just adjust things a little bit there. There we are. And I hope that, as we said, that everybody enjoys the coding challenge, something we plan to do more of in the future as well. But now we want to transition over to today's topic. I want to do a little bit more on HANA development, go a bit in depth here, but hopefully demystify a little bit for you some of the things that are going on with HANA development. I think sometimes it's fun to look behind the curtain, so to speak, and figure out what's going on, and that gives us a lot of insights into the flexibility of what's possible here. So let me start with something very simple. Let's just go ahead and log in here. I'm going to start on HANA Express, but I'm kind of going to go back and forth here. I've also got a HANA Cloud instance running. I'm going to be using Web IDE for SAP HANA on my local system. I'll also do some local development outside of any IDE, and also some Business Application Studio. So I'm going to be bouncing between all these different environments, and really the purpose here is to show you how similar they all are at the heart. But let's go ahead and jump in here. I'm going to go ahead and log in. I will also say, probably at several points today, you're going to be able to see my password to some of the services that I'm working on. Nobody freak out. I'm either using a very common demo password on just my demo system, the ones that we use for workshops and stuff like that, or for some of the other generated ones for the HANA services. I'm going to completely delete the service instances after I'm done with this live stream. So it just makes it easier, particularly on a live stream. I don't know of any way to elegantly blur that out or anything like that, so don't be alarmed. But let's start here. Basic HANA development, right? And most people, most of you probably familiar with using the HANA Studio, but hopefully you've at least progressed into the Web IDE world. And what does this typically look like? Let's just do some development real quick here. Not that we want to spend too much time on the basics, but I'm going to start a new project from template. I'm going to do a HANA database application, and we're just going to give it a quick name here. Choose my target space. I don't need any namespaces. And yes, I'm a HANA 2.0 SPS 4 on this system. I'm starting off here on my local HANA Express, remember, because I want to just talk about the basics. But everything I'm doing here could be applicable to Web IDE full stack, cloud, basically all the variants. So we're just going to start here, like I said, very simply. And of course, what does our project have? It has a single module inside a multi-target application, a database module. It's got a package JSON. That's going to be pretty important. We'll come back to that later. Actually, I want to leave that. And then inside we have a source folder, and we've got this HDI config. So let's talk about some of the components that this wizard created for us. The HDI config file is something that HDI, HANA Deployment Infrastructure, that's the server-side component that is going to actually take our design time artifacts and turn them into runtime objects. And it has to know which file extensions map to which server-side plugins and what version of those plugins we want to target. So an important configuration file to have because it's needed by the server side to do that mapping. Package JSON, we'll come back to this in a minute. It's very important and certainly something that I want to talk about, but we'll put it aside for the moment. But basically in basic HANA development, we're going to just, and I've prepared some content here as well, we're going to go to the source folder, and let's say, for instance, let's just create one table here. And say new database artifact. We'll call this what? Purchase order header, and we want it to be a HDB table, and this particular artifact lets us use SQL DDL. Notice without the create or alter statement, because it's still going to be a managed artifact, meaning the HDI deployer will decide what to do to create it. It will see if the table already exists. If it does, it will alter it, add column, whatever it needs to do to get it to the state that we're describing here. So we're still using a runtime, design time separation. And because we referenced purchase order item, let's also go ahead and create another database artifact for that. Item, table, and you don't want to watch me type that either. So I'll pull that up real quick. There we are. Now I could load this with data and things like that. I just want to get the basics out here because we really want to talk about more of what's going on during the deployment process than doing basic development. But I've got enough here that there's at least something interesting to look at. So at this point, let's go ahead and right mouse click and do a build on the database module. And it's really pretty amazing everything that's going on when you click build from the Web IDE. And probably most people have never stopped to really think about it before. But that's what we want to do today. We want to dissect what's going on behind this build command so that we can begin to see how we can do it in other environments than the Web IDE. Because today, I think most people feel kind of trapped into the Web IDE as your only choice because you don't know how to do the same things that it's doing either in its wizards or in commands like this build command. So I'm going to go ahead and let it finish. There it is. It's all done. And let's look back at the log because this will actually tell us quite a bit about what's going on here. The first step is it actually created a instance of the HANA service type for the particular resource. So we have our HANA database, of course, HANA Express on-premise, or if you have a HANA Cloud. But when we want to create a new project inside there, we need to set aside, well, essentially a schema, right? That would be, and a schema is not specific to the HANA database. Many other databases have schemas, the concept of a schema. It's really just a way to separate your content. And most likely you use it to organize your content, but also to help control the security on your content, because you can set security at the schema level, and then all objects inside that schema inherit that security, right? So it's a fundamental concept in most databases. Certainly in HANA and many other databases, all database artifacts must belong to a schema and a single schema. So it is an atomic, very, very fundamental concept in the database. And what we're doing here when we create this instance, this workshop 00, and then this just jumble of letters to make it unique. We'll update that later. But what it's doing is it's in essence creating our schema. But in the case of HDI, it's actually doing more than that. It's not just creating a schema, but it's creating an HDI container. Now, don't be confused by the fact that we call it an HDI container. Fundamentally, it is a schema. It's actually creating multiple schemas, but it's doing it in such a way that it's managing that schema. So it isn't our user ID, this workshop 00. That isn't the user that's creating any of these objects inside the database. It is the service broker, technical user, that's creating the schemas, creating the technical user specific to this container. So every container gets its own set of technical users, a different user for creating and owning the artifacts, as opposed to the user who is going to be used at execution at runtime. So it gives us really a very strong security concept by having different technical users separating out, not using our own logon user as the development user. It isn't the owner. So we get a good managed life cycle around our database development objects, and we get good runtime security. But the fact that when we did this build, it did all of this for us, right? We didn't have to create any users. We didn't have to create the schemas in the database. We didn't have to do any of the grants. So it becomes a bit of a black box to us as well. Now, once we've created that empty schema in the database, the HDI container, then we want to deploy our content into it. These two database tables, purchase order header and purchase order item. Now, how this works from the Web IDE, when we do this build, once again, it isn't doing anything magical. We can go look at what it's doing. This is where the package JSON comes into play. All it's really doing is this database module is a Node.js module. Very much like if you would create an XSJS or CAP service or app router, it's just another Node.js runtime. And really the XSA or Cloud Foundry or wherever you deploy this to, it doesn't know there's anything special about this. It doesn't know that it has to do with the HANA database. All it knows is it's going to run this start script. And this start script is a Node.js module, an SAP supplied Node.js module called HDI deploy. And all the logic to communicate to the server and send it the design time artifacts and do the actual deployment is all contained in this Node.js code. It's not part of the Web IDE itself. That's kind of the beauty of this. It's a Node.js module which SAP publishes to our npm repository, and what that has really done is it's freed us up. The IDE itself is not responsible for the deployment. It's only starting this Node.js module. That way we can update the deployer simply by publishing a new version of this in npm. We can do the deployment from other IDEs that don't know anything about HANA, and that's the real heart of what we want to get here today, is that by no means are we locked into the Web IDE in order to do HANA development. Even though it feels that way if you've started doing development here, because we're just right mouse clicking and saying build, but as we learn more about what's actually going on here behind the scenes with this build, we'll see how we can do this from another environment as well. Now, what the actual deployer, this HDI deploy module, the rest of this log is output from it. You know, it's collecting the files, it's sending them to the server, it's processing the HDI config. You see this migrating libraries and processing the HDI config file here, and then you see processing for each of the individual artifacts, design time artifacts, the two HTTP tables, where it's going to create, it's going to generate the SQL DDL, data definition language, to create those inside the schema. And that's what we see at the end of the deployment. It's done. We have a log, and now we could go over to a tool like the Database Explorer, and we could go ahead and connect to our HDI container. There it is. We'll say okay. Give it a second to get connected. There we are. And we should see, now we're looking at the runtime objects. We're actually looking at the schema underneath the HDI container, and we see that we have two database tables there. And just to prove to you here, we can open SQL console, select current schema from dummy. And there we see our schema name that was generated for us. You can see it's just taking my project resource name, putting an _1 on the end. That's important because we are in a multi-developer environment, and one or more developers might be working on the same project at the same time. We need to make sure that the actual target schema is unique behind the scenes. That's the other thing that the HDI deployer and the creation of the container does for us. It generates, it makes sure that we're unique there. We can also see here, select current user, and you will see that even though we're logged in as workshop 00, it is this generated runtime user. So the name of the container, something to keep it unique, _RT, that tells us that it's the runtime user. If we went and looked in the user management, we'd see a very similarly named user _DT. That's the design time user. The DT user is the one responsible for creating the objects in the database and owning them. The RT is the one that executes SQL against the container at runtime. So we have a clear separation of ownership there. So that's the basics. Let me go ahead and look at the chat real quick. I saw a couple things coming in. If you have an S4 system, using Web IDE isn't the same as using Eclipse to create HANA tables. Well, fundamentally, using Eclipse or HANA Studio is a similar process, but what we've seen here with the HDI deployer, the fact that these source objects are generally stored in Git for their permanent persistence, and they're only sent in the database to create the runtime objects, that's fundamentally different than the way that HANA Studio or the Eclipse-based tooling worked. Whereas there we had the HANA repository, where we also stored the design time artifacts in the database in sysrepo as well. Of course, the whole security concept of HDI that I just described, the generation of the schemas, the generation of the technical users, that's all completely different in the old environment, in the HANA Studio environment, which of course is all deprecated now. And you want to be using HDI concepts, but as you'll see here, you aren't forced to use the Web IDE. We're going to show you how we can do the same development elsewhere as well. All right, so moving on, we've deployed our two simple tables, and it was all sort of magically happening because of this build command. But how can we do this from our own development environment? Let's say I want to do this development, but I want to use Visual Studio Code, and I don't want to use the Web IDE. And I'll even go a step further here. One of the I was working on a project inside of SAP, and one of the things that we said was we didn't even want to use XSA, the XSA runtime. We wanted to use just the HANA database standalone. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start my project. Now, normally I start my project with a template from GitHub, and I clone from GitHub, and I have a template project out there. But I'm going to show you the most basic, fundamental way to start here, which is I'm just going to start by creating a new folder. And completely empty folder, and I'm going to go ahead and open it in VS Code. Now we're going to work in here. Now, what I've done over the years to kind of make things a little bit easier, and I've released this as an open source sample, is I have a little utility called HANA CLI. For instance, I'll just run the version command here to make sure that everything's going. There we are. And it's a Node.js module, just designed to help with some of the scripting that you might do as a developer when you are working with HANA development from outside of the Web IDE. So, for instance, I looked at some of the things like the build command or the wizards that we have in the Web IDE, and said, well, how could we do some of that completely outside of the Web IDE? So what I want to do here, this is VS Code running locally on my laptop. I've got Node.js installed on my local laptop. I want to do all my development and testing completely in this environment, and I just want to connect to my HANA database. In this case, I'm going to connect to HANA Express, but I could also be connecting remotely to HANA Cloud on the SAP Cloud platform. The same processes and techniques work. And I'm going to use this little HANA CLI utility, which is published to npm. So if you want it, all you have to do is do npm install, and I put it globally here, so it's available to all my projects, and then just the HANA CLI command, and then it will install onto your local machine, and you'll have it available from the shell. I'm not going to install it again. I've already installed it, and it's up to date, so I'm good to go. Now I'm here in this empty folder, and I want to start doing some development. Now I could start by manually creating my DB module and my package JSON and all of the stuff that the Web IDE wizard did for me. And of course, you could do it by hand. You could cut and paste from another project. But one thing that I put here in the HANA CLI tool, is we'll just look at the help command, is there is a create module command. And it creates the database module for you, and it puts a lot of those basic files in there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say HANA CLI create module, and you're going to see what it's going to do. It's going to say, do I want to target HANA Cloud, because it's going to adjust the template just a little bit differently if I'm targeting HANA Cloud. Say no, I'm not going to do that now because I'm working with HANA Express, and there it's done. and it has created the DB folder. And just like the Web IDE wizard, I've now got a package.json file with the HDI deployer in it, and the same commands here. The start command to start the HDI deployer. I've got an SRC folder, and I've got the HDI config file here as well. So basically what I've done so far with this one command line command is the same thing as going to the Web IDE and creating a new project, but doing it as a HANA database module, or going to an existing project and just saying add module HANA database. So we've got a good starting point here now where we can do our same database development. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat a little bit, just like I did before. Instead of typing everything, I'm going to cut and paste it. So just bring that into my DB source. Over, and there we are now in our SRC folder, just like I had in the Web IDE project. I've got my purchase order header HDB table, purchase order item HDB table, and because I was cutting and pasting and not having to create files one at a time, we'll get a little fancy here, and we'll also go ahead and create a view, and we'll load 2 CSV files in here as well, just to give us a little bit of data, not very much, but just enough to be able to play around with. Okay. Now we want to do that. We want to do everything that the build command did. And remember, we talked about it was doing a lot for us. It was creating the container inside the database, which ultimately also created the schema and several technical users. We need to do all that by hand. Well, we don't want to do it by hand, right? It would be too error prone to do all that. We want something to help us do that. But of course, one approach would be we could do it using the XSA or the CF command line, and we could use the create service command. And that's essentially what the Web IDE is doing when it creates an instance of the HANA service. It's just saying create service, and that creates the container and the technical users and everything for us. But remember, I said I was working on a project where we didn't even want to use XSA. We wanted to do HDI development, but we wanted to do it completely without XSA or Cloud Foundry. We wanted to do it with just a pure database. So let's start with that. So with the HANA CLI little utility sample that I created here, we can say HANA CLI connect, and it's going to ask us for a connection string. So we're telling it how to connect to the database. So HXE host 39015. So if you're connecting to HANA Express, it's 3, and then the instance number of your HANA system. 90 is the default instance number for HANA Express, and the last 2 digits, the 15 in this case, tells you which tenant to target. 15 being the first tenant, 13 being the system DB. Now, my system is set up so I do all my development in the first tenant, not in the system DB. And what user do I want to connect with? I'm going to do my initial connection with the system user, which is my Power administration user, and then that user will generate the actual development users just like the Web IDE did. Put in the password for system. Do I want to encrypt my connection? No, I don't want to. You do have to encrypt connections that use HANA as a service or HANA Cloud. Using local HANA Express, I don't need to encrypt my connection. I don't want to use the HDB user store. I don't need a trust store certificate. That would also be required for HANA as a service or HANA Cloud. And it has connected to the system. And now I can do things like HANA CLI status -A, and that will run with this administrative user, and it's doing things like checking what things I have access to. I did status. Let's do, this one's a little more interesting. Let's do system info. There we are. And we can see, yes, I'm connected to my system. I can see what version it is, how much disk space, CPU, memory is available, things like that, which processes are running. So I am connected. Let's see, what else do I want to do? I want to make sure I can say schemas, and it will list all the schemas in the database. And you know what I did? I think I made a mistake when I connected. No, I'm good. There's my S-Flight. I thought I wasn't able to see S-Flight, but there it is. So my demo will work. I've got my I'm in the right spot. So how are we connected? It's really this default env JSON file. And I'm going to go ahead and open this. And like I said, you're going to be able to see the connection parameters, including my password. This is not specific to this HANA client utility. This concept of a default environment is something that's built into the XS environment module, built into CAP understands this as well. The HDI deployer understands this. Basically what we're doing is we're creating a file to simulate the environment that both Cloud Foundry and XS Advance exposes to our application when it runs on the runtime. So basically we're simulating Cloud Foundry or XSA runtime with just a local file that will be read and processed and give us connection parameters. And we can simulate basically the connections configurations for the app router or the UAA, all those things that are services in the in both XSA and Cloud Foundry. We can put all of our connection information here so that we can run locally, debug locally, and connect remotely to wherever those resources are. Like I said, we're connecting to HANA Express here, but this would work just as well against HANA Cloud. And I still could test and run and even do my deploy from my local environment here on my local machine and just connect remotely to wherever HANA is. So nothing magical here, nothing that I've invented. This is, like I said, all part of the way the development process is designed to work when you do it outside of the Web IDE. The Web IDE actually has to send the deployer over to XSA or Cloud Foundry and run it in that environment. What we're going to do here, though, is we're going to do all this on my local machine. So the next step of what I want to do here is I actually want to go ahead and create the container. And what I want to show you, what's interesting, is the source code behind this CLI tool that we're using. If we come in here and we look at the create container, what we're doing in this create container command basically did a little reverse engineering of what the create service command does in the when you do the build command and it creates the HDI service. There's SQL APIs to do all of these things. And they're all documented. They're there in help.sap.com. So these aren't secret APIs or anything like that. The idea is that HDI is also accessible via a pure SQL interface. We often think of it as being part of XSA or part of Cloud Foundry, that the only way to do HDI is to do it in that context. That's not actually true. That's just sort of the default way and the way everyone learns to do it. But in fact, there's a complete SQL interface to all of this as well. And all I've done here in this HANA command line tool is I just parameterized it and put a little script together to simplify the process. Because what we want to do is we want to call a stored procedure. This is the SQL interface that I was talking about, to create the container. And I want to be able to pass in the container name. And then once we've created the container, then we're going to do things like create the design time user and create the runtime user. And we create those users, and we assign them passwords. And if you look up here, I'm just doing some things to dynamically generate those. Generate the unique users, generate unique passwords. Then we need to set up the security. So once again, there are APIs that are part of HDI at the SQL level to grant access. So here I'm granting container API privileges to the design time user so that they have the proper access to be the owner of all the objects in the HDI container schema. And I'm also setting up the runtime user so that they have access as well. And I give the runtime user insert, delete, execute, update, select. So the runtime user can't alter database objects. They can't do a create object, but they can do normal SQL, select, insert, update, delete. Then we have to configure the libraries. Here we're just saying configure the default libraries. We're setting up some roles. We're creating the default container roles, and we grant those to the runtime users as well. And then at the end, we execute all of this, output the results, and store that in a default env file as well. So if I go back here to my little project, wrong window. So remember, we've got the source file. I'm here. It's when I put that, am I in the DB folder? When I did that command, I was not in the DB folder. So let's move that file up into the DB folder. There we are. So we want to be in the DB folder now. And I want to issue that create container command. So I'm going to say HANA Cli create container. It's going to ask us a few questions. What do we want our container name to be? So demo 2. Do we want to encrypt our connection? No, we don't need to encrypt our connection. So now it's connecting to the HANA database as the admin user and performing all those things that I just showed you that it could do. Creating the container, creating the technical users. So basically everything that you get when you do the build command in the Web IDE, the first part of it that we talked about, to set up your environment, it just did, but it did not pass through XSA or Cloud Foundry to do that. It did it purely via SQL interface. And then it wrote out this default env JSON file. And now when we execute commands, so we can say HANA CLI, system info, but I won't use the -a, and it will use the default env, not the default env admin, and it will connect with the container users. And you'll see now we're connected. Like here, when I did the statistics, I got insufficient privilege because I'm connected as a different user. Let's do status here. What you see is much less information. And you see I'm connected now as my container technical user, the runtime user, just like you saw in the Database Explorer. When you open the container, you're automatically connected as the container runtime user. The exact same thing is happening here. I'm connected as the container runtime user. Okay. But now we want to do the other half of that build command, which was to actually send the runtime, the design time objects into the database and have them generate tables or whatever we're creating. So we want to take the source directory and send it in the database. Just like the build command inside the Web IDE, all it did was call npm start. That's what we're going to do here from the command line. We can do the exact same thing here. So from the DB folder, I'm just going to say npm start. And, oh, very important. I missed a step. In the Web IDE, your npm dependencies, like the SAP HDI deploy, it automatically runs an npm install for you to pull those down from the npm repository. Now I need to do that here one time to pull that down. So inside this folder, I need to say npm install, and it's going to go grab the HDI deployer from npm and bring it down to my local environment. That's what it's doing now. It's copying that down, copying down all the dependencies. Give it just a minute there to finish. The other thing that I could do is I could install the HDI deployer globally as well, and then I wouldn't need to install it into each project. I actually do that sometimes in some environments, but I wanted this to be pretty clean to show you what your experience would be like if you were starting from scratch. So now that I've pulled down the HDI deployer, I actually have it here. You can go into this node modules folder, and you can see that it's copied it down and made it part of my project. And now I can go ahead. Now we'll do npm start. There we are. And it's running the deployer. And you see the exact same kind of output that we saw from the Web IDE. So once again, the Web IDE build command isn't doing anything magical or something that only it can do. All it's doing is calling the npm start command. We can do this from any environment that supports Node runtime, which is just about everywhere. And you see the exact same output here. We connected to our HANA database, and it even says here, I'm connecting using the settings inside the default env JSON. It's collecting the files from the local folders. We have a few more than we had in the Web IDE. It set them into the HANA database, and we see the same compilation and processing going on the HANA server side. And we can now see this if I just say HANA CLI tables, and it'll list the tables inside my container. And we have our two new tables there: purchase order header, purchase order item. So once again, just to summarize what we've done here, we've done the same thing that the Web IDE build command and the Web IDE project wizard did, but without the Web IDE, without XSA, without CF. We've communicated to the HANA database using only SQL, but we've created our HDI container, we've created our technical users, we've used the HDI deployer, we've deployed design time artifacts into the HANA database, but once again, without any of those extra things that there's often a misconception that we have a technical dependency upon when actually we don't. Okay. Last part of this that I want to show is I've been doing everything locally here with the with HANA Express, but we could also, I want to make sure that my workspace didn't time out here. Yes, of course I have to log back in. But what I've prepared here as well is I have a HANA Cloud instance running on the SAP Cloud platform. I'm coming over here to the Business Application Studio, and we have a very similar experience. Today, with the Business Application Studio, we don't yet have HANA-specific editors, wizards. We don't have the build command. So you might say, oh, well, how can I do HANA development? And yes, we're going to add some of those things, but you can begin to do some of that HANA development even now using these same kind of approaches. Now, one thing that I want to show here. Let me go ahead and create a new folder. That's demo 3, and switch into that. We have the same. I have the same HANA CLI, in fact, available here. I've just done the npm install into the Business Application Studio, and I'll show you. It's available here as well, and we can use the same sort of commands. Now, the one thing that I found as I was doing development, I started to adjust it to offer the same create container command via the SQL interface. But actually in the new HANA Cloud, it's HANA version 4, they've made a lot of changes. For instance, users have to be created inside of groups. Containers also have to be created inside of groups as well. And I was really faced with having to rewrite this entire script to work for HANA Cloud. And I started to do that, but then I thought, well, I'm in HANA Cloud. Maybe I'm always going to have CF if I'm working in HANA Cloud, because it lives inside of CF. So why not just do the same sort of thing that I did, but let's use the create service command. So first of all, if I come here and I list my CF services, you see I'm automatically logged into Cloud Foundry. That's one of the nice things that the Business Application Studio does, is it remembers your Cloud Foundry target, and you can click down here if you want to switch your targets. It does let you easily switch between them. So now what I want to do is I've got the HANA Cloud, and that I've already created my HANA Cloud instance in this space, and I want to create an instance. So I can say CF create service, and I want to create a HANA service, HDI shared. But and I tell you what, I can do this you can do this from the command line. I'm actually going to go over here and do it from the UI. And you can do it from either. I didn't have my command started up from the command line. I was going to have it ready to cut and paste, and it's perhaps a little easier to do here from the UI, but I'll show you how you can go back and forth between the same. But I want to create my HDI container inside my HANA Cloud instance. So I'm just going to come here to HANA Schemas HDI containers, and I'm going to go to instances. I'm going to create a new instance, HDI shared. Now the only thing that I need to do here is add database ID, and I should have kept that other window open, because now I need to go get the database ID. It's the part that's maybe a little tricky that I didn't want to do from the command line, which is why I went to the graphical UI. All right, you know it's all live demo coding here when things don't load up well or quickly. Well, that's really not very nice, is it? Let's try navigating in here. There we are. Development space. All I wanted to do is come back here to HANA Cloud so I get my database ID. Okay. It's not, there we are. The database ID is on the first part of this endpoint. So we'll copy just that first part up to the first dot, not the whole thing. I've talked about this in a previous video. I know it might be tempting since there's a copy value to clipboard. That won't work. Take just that first part, put it in here as the database ID, say next. Yeah, we're not going to bind it to an application. We can give it an instance name. that's for our container. And it's going to take a few seconds to create, but it's doing the same thing. Once again, I'm now showing you a different way to do the same thing. When we did it from the Web IDE, it created the HDI shared instance automatically. That creates the technical users. It created the container. It created the schemas inside the database. Then I showed you how from the command line we did it basically by calling SQL stored procedures and SQL commands. Now I'm showing you a third way to do it. You can do it via the Cloud Foundry or XSA service broker itself, which is really all the Web IDE is doing, is calling over to the service broker to issue these commands. You can do it manually from there as well. That's what I've done right here. I've initiated the same. I could have done it from the command line, like I said, though. Then I would have had to go get the database ID and cut and paste that in as well. And I just wanted to avoid some of that. You can come in through the graphical UI and issue the same command. It's refreshing super speedy there, but yeah, there it is. So now I've got my command, and what I can do from here, if I reissue my services, we should see that in the list of services now. There it is. Wait, no, that's my HANA instance. There it is, HANA AFS Demo 1. So that's our HDI container. And now I can say CF create service key, and I've got to service key. I don't do this often enough to have this particular command memorized. So it's CF create service key. We want our service instance, and we want to create a new key for that. Let's just call it default. And that's creating the credentials for connecting, so the technical users. So now we have the container created itself. We have the technical users created, all done via the CF command line, although both these commands could also be done from XSA with just the XSA command line. And now what we want to do is we want to say, we want to use the HANA CLI once again, but there's a command here called service key, which will go grab the service key details and write them into a default env JSON. So we're going to say HANA CLI service key, and now why is it asking me for connection string? That's not right. Well, like I said, instance name. I think I have the wrong label on this. This was something new I added to the HANA CLI just the other day, and it's looking like I have the wrong label. So let's maybe start over here so that it's not so confusing. Say HANA CLI service key. Let's go ahead and put the instance of our service, and we'll put the key was default. I'll have to go check that label. And yes, we do want to encrypt the connection. No, we don't want to validate the certificate. Yes, this is Cloud Foundry. So what it's doing is it's calling into Cloud Foundry. It's fetching the key and all the service credentials assigned to that key, and then it's writing it into a default env JSON file. So if we open this, if we open our folder here, we see our default env JSON, and we didn't create the credentials in this step. the create service key created the credentials, but we were able to go fetch those credentials, and we've written them in the same sort of default env JSON file. So now we can do all the same sort of commands that we did before locally, like HANA CLI status, except now we're connecting once again with the container runtime user, and all the other commands that we did. I could create tables, I could do the deploy, I of course could do the HANA CLI create module, and that would create my DB module. Say yes, this is HANA Cloud. It created my DB module, created my package JSON. You will notice that I'm on the cloud, so the version in the HDI config is slightly different, but now I could do all the same development. I could bring those files in. I'm running a little short of time here today, I'm afraid. I could have brought all those same files in, done my npm start here from the Business Application Studio, and done the entire same process here against HANA Cloud using the Business Application Studio. Of course, I could have also done this from my local development environment as well. The whole point here is the range of choices that you have. Once again, I want to stress, so often, and I think we've done that at SAP, we've given an impression that maybe the Web IDE, maybe only the tools that we've provided, that was the only way to do development with HANA. Absolutely not the case. Open SQL interfaces, easy to script, as you see here. I've shared this script with the community. It's available in NPN. You're welcome to reuse it, share it, with, enhance it, whatever you want to do with it. But it really opens up. Well, it didn't open up HANA development. It was already open, but I hope that what this is showing you is how open it is already, and how we don't have to wait for SAP to deliver all the tooling experience that you might want. And yes, we're going to do some of that in the Business Application Studio, and maybe some of that would be available in VS Code, but you can do all that today. And so much of HANA development can be done from a variety of locations, certainly not locked into the Web IDE only, or Eclipse or HANA Studio or any of those things. So I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive. We did go pretty in depth here, but I hope that's made you more comfortable with HANA development, but also broaden the horizon of what's possible with HANA development. So I thank you for joining me on this journey deep into the rabbit hole that is HDI deployment, HDI containers, and how we can create all that content. I hope you've enjoyed, and that you join us again next week for another episode of the ABAP Freak Show. So signing off for now. Have a good week, everybody.